Okay, so today we are joined by the legendary Frank Turner, I'm happy to say. How's it going, Frank?
Very well. It's nice to be described as legendary at this time in the morning, but it's very nice to be part of this chat.
You do realise it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon right now?
Well, you know, it's not quite 1 o'clock. It's 4 minutes to on my clock, and also, like, I feel like that among the many other things that the coronavirus pandemic is doing to me is destroying my sense of time.
Yeah,
yeah, I think that's fair.
Well, I'm actually on call. I'm actually on call with work at the moment, so if I disappear, that's where I've gone.
What do you do?
I work for BT. I manage a team of content designers who look after all like digital internal websites. So they look after all the processes. I'm not going to bore you with it, but
no, but you're keeping us all connected at the moment.
Yeah,
so it's appreciated.
Exactly. Yeah. There's lots of people.
Definitely.
Yeah,
imagine how screwed we'd be if that connection failed.
Well, I was talking to somebody about this yesterday, about how we'd all be coping without the internet, or like what it must have been like in 1919 and all the rest of it. And like, I definitely, if I'm going to live through a global pandemic, I'd rather do it now than in the past.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That was that on just out of interest. Was that on Punks in Pubs?
I think it was, yes. Yeah, sorry, I'm repeating myself. Forgive me that.
No, not at all. Shout out to them because that's a cool podcast.
Yeah, they're great.
So, it was cool to see you doing that yesterday.
So what does a staying at home Frank Turner look like at the moment? Then how's that working out for you?
Physically, I haven't had a shower yet today, and I'm still in my pajamas. So that's what I look like physically. I mean, it's a strange thing for me. I've always been nomadic in the way that I organise my life, and one of the many things I love about touring is the sense of being in a different place every day. And I'm very fortunate now in that I have my own place, and I live with my wife and my cat, and that's a lucky thing in life, and there are many worse places I could be stuck at this moment in time, but nevertheless every morning waking up and still being in the same place is starting to get a little bit old at the moment, should we say. It was lovely for the first week, having a bit of a staycation, but it's I'm doing my best to keep it under control, but it is starting to get a bit frustrating.
So were you just having downtime anyway when this kind of became more serious, or were you out?
I was on tour actually. I was on a UK tour. We got the Middlesbrough date in. You'll be pleased to hear. But yeah, we had 5 shows left on the tour, and it was me and my wife and my friends. Micah Schnabel and Vanessa Jean Speckman from the USA. We were on the bus together doing solo shows around the UK, and it was an absolute blast. And then the news was kind of gathering steam, rolling downhill like a snowball. And the last 3 shows of the tour were really odd because, the government hadn't yet brought in any kind of bans, but people had started to say that large gatherings are a bad idea. And obviously that's what I do for a living, is I try and gather people together, and hopefully large ones.
Of course,
it just kind of, the last 3 shows every day, all day, me and my agent and my manager and my tour manager were just having long debates about whether or not we should actually be doing the show.
Yeah.
And 3 times we said yes, and then the third one, the last show, was in Southend-on-Sea, and the vibe in the room was just weird and not particularly pleasant. So at that moment, with very heavy hearts, we decided to call it and pull the tour and go home. And then I'm supposed to be in Australia right now on tour, so it's pretty crushing not being there, because I love Australia.
Yeah, presumably you've toured there a few times at this point.
Many times, but I haven't been back for a little while. I mean, over a year, and I was going to New Zealand, Australia, and then South Africa, and then the thing I'm saddest about is I was then heading to South America for the first time. I've never been there before. I've been trying to book a tour there for a decade, and we finally had one on the books and on sale, and the shows were selling well, and and then we had to pull it, and I'm gutted about it.
So where are you at the moment then, in terms of kind of rescheduling and all that? I mean, are you sitting down with your management at the moment, or are you just kind of putting everything on standby?
We're putting everything on hold, really. I think there are, with all due respect, there are people I know in the industry who are starting to reschedule shows for like end of the summer, start of the autumn, and I think that's crazy, personally. I don't think
it's pushing a bit, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, it's just the last thing you want to do is reschedule a show and then cancel it again. And none of us know how long it's going to last. And indeed, more crucially, in a how it's going to end, because I don't think there's just going to be a day where somebody waves a magic wand and suddenly it's fine. You know, I think that at the very least there's going to be a kind of staggered return to normalcy, and when I'm going to be able to do what I do with no restrictions at all in the future is an interesting question.
Yeah, and I do see that you've announced you're doing Fest this year, which I mean, you know, really.
Yeah,
you know.
which I mean, the thing is, you know, it's obviously these things get booked in advance. I got booked to do Fest months ago, and yesterday was their announce day, and as an artist playing the festival, I did my announce as you're supposed to.
Of course.
I was slightly conflicted about that, I have to say, and if nothing else, it felt like a slightly odd time to announce a new thing at a point in time when everything else is getting cancelled, and indeed people are suffering economically. But you know, I sincerely hope that it goes ahead, and of course if it does, I'll be there. But it's a strange thing. My plans, the way that my life works is generally booked, at least conceptually, up to 18 months in advance, and I have a lot of plans going forward, and how many of them are going to happen, and when we'll fit in reschedules and all that kind of thing is an open question right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, what do you think in terms of the bigger impact on the industry? Kind of, obviously, this is clearly, you know, massive impact in terms of gigs and shows. But I mean, do you think much is going to change across the industry and for you as an artist on a bigger scale? I mean, do you think that looks like
possibly? I mean, I think that it's early days to be making those kind of predictions with any confidence at the moment. I mean, it's interesting that there are winners in the music industry right now, which is the streaming services, you know, because everybody's sat at home listening to records and watching films. And the debate about the financial setup of the streaming services is a long and complicated and arguably slightly dull one. But one might hope that the upshot of all of this, there might be some kind of rebalancing of that. I mean, the other thing, you know, people are doing live streams. I've been doing live streams. I think that over time people will get more creative with those and try and, you know, I think it's kind of cool. If thousands of people around the world are experimenting with the format, then people will come up with better ideas, and I think that's cool. I don't know what that'll look like in the long term. I don't think that streaming is going to long term kind of replace live shows in any meaningful way, because the thing that's so apparent to, both in doing a live stream and in watching them, because I've been watching quite a few as well, is as much as it is not a terrible substitute for communality, you know, you just miss being in the room. That's what a show's about more than anything else, being in a room full of other people. Yeah,
and I mean, I see you're doing some benefit gigs for kind of independent venues. Do you think? I mean, is that just something that you just kind of wanted to drive yourself, or had you been speaking to those guys and heard that you know that? I mean,
I do. I mean, I have a lot of friends who run indie venues. I mean, you know, the guys who run Nambuka and the Joiners, the two I've done so far, are old friends. Essentially, I got home and immediately did a benefit for my crew. I mean, it just seemed obvious and easy, to be honest. You know, I could sit in my front room, and also indeed Micah and my wife were in the house, and so the whole touring bill for the shows that we cancelled was around. So we thought, well, let's do one more show of the tour, as it were. So we did that and did a fundraiser for that, and that worked really well. But then the following day, I woke up in the same place as I was talking about earlier. So it was kind of, I immediately started, well, you know, maybe I can do that again, and what's an appropriate thing to raise money for, because I have income from merchandise and from song publishing, which is going to, at least for the time being, is going to keep me in house and home. I think that, and then, you know, immediately it did cross my mind already anyway, because running a small venue is a pretty thankless task anyway. Your margins are very small. Venues tend to run month to month or even week to week in terms of their survival. So a shutdown like this is going to be absolutely catastrophic for a lot of independent venues. And I can't single-handedly save the live industry or indeed independent venues or anything like that. That's rather beyond my skills as a dickhead with a guitar, but like I can contribute a little bit. And one of my hopes, and I am having some conversations about this, is that other artists will start doing this too, because it doesn't just have to be me doing this, and it's so easy to do. And indeed, everybody wins in the sense that you know, it is obviously to my benefit on some levels doing live stream shows. I get my audience tuned in. You get to connect with your audience, and I just want to kind of grab other artists and be like, you can do this in like 10 minutes, and help out a local venue, because none of us would be here without those venues.
Yeah, and I mean, I think from like a cultural side as well, you would hope that, I think people, I guess everyone gets caught up in their own busy worlds and lives, and I mean, I'm guilty of myself of not going to as much live music as I should do. But I think once this all blows over, you would hope that there'd be this, just I guess, a real thirst for it again, and hopefully people come out in their droves to support it.
I hope so. Yeah, I think that there will be a big boom in terms of gatherings. I mean, I just want to go to the pub. Do you know what I mean? Like, I actually live next door to a pub, right? And I quite often don't go there because when I get home, it's kind of like, well, I could go to the pub or I could go and sit on my sofa and have a beer there.
Yeah.
And quite often the sofa wins. You know what I mean? But
yeah,
like once this lifts, I'm going to be in that pub all the time.
Yeah. Have you been doing many sort of like Zoom beers with your friends? That seems to be
my mum has discovered Zoom, which is a blessing and a curse. Just in the sense that she wants to do it all the time. Yeah, you know, quite often if I'm having like a text conversation with somebody, I'll abandon it and just hit FaceTime or whatever. You know what I mean? Because it is nice to see people and to talk to people. And you know, I love my wife very much and we're getting along fine, but at the end of the day, this is the most amount of time we've spent with just each other, like since we got together. And it's all well and good, but both of us, we're very social people, you know.
On a lighter note, I just wanted to just reference, it seems to be like you're having a bit of banter with Fat Mike with some of these Instagram posts.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. The thing about that is I now have to be quite circumspect. When's this podcast going out?
Probably the next few days. Next few days.
Okay, I'll be circumspect then because I'm not actually sure what the plan is. But basically, Mike and I have a plan of a thing that we're doing together that we have been planning for months and months and months.
Wow.
And it is going to hit the world in the way that it will. I can't. This is the thing. I have to be kind of cryptic about this. It's going to hit the world. Basically, my point is there is method to our madness. There is a reason that we're doing all this shit. We're not just taking the piss out of each other. As much as I would do that anyway. I fucking love my old friend, and he's a wonderful guy, but and indeed a complete maniac. But there is all of this. All of this is building up to something.
Okay, and that build-up shouldn't be affected through by what we're going through at the moment.
No, in fact, we're kind of moving it forward a bit just because fuck it. Do you know what I mean?
Awesome.
Like
people
amazing. Are stuck at home, so why not?
That's so cool. Yeah, he's such a character. So, you know, presumably you grew up on his music, so to be able to call him an old friend must be a hell of a thing.
Yeah, I mean, I met him a decade ago. Actually, so it was at Reading Festival, and I'd played the main stage, and NOFX were headlining Lockup. And they were doing that thing. They play the Decline, and they get somebody else to step in on Hefe's guitar when Hefe plays trumpet right at the end of the song. And Skiba was supposed to do it, and Skiba had gone AWOL. And somebody introduced me to Mike. I was just hanging around like a fanboy. Somebody introduced me to Mike, and Mike said, "Do you know the chords to that bit?" And I kind of said to myself, "I know all the chords to all of your songs," which is true. And then I was like, "Yeah, sure, I could probably figure it out." Do you know what I mean? Trying to play it cool. And so they threw me up there, and I did the song. And Mike said to me afterwards that I did the backing vocal at the end as well, when it goes, "We are the queer, we are the whore." And he said that they've had loads of people do that stand-in bit, and I was the first person who'd ever done the backing vocal. So he decided to check out who I was. He had no idea who I was. And he went off and listened to my stuff. And then next time I played a show in LA, which was about 4 months later, he came down to the show. And we went for a beer afterwards. So I was just sitting there picturing myself being like, I'm having a beer with Fat Mike. And we both got really pissed and told each other we loved each other, sort of thing, pretty much from the off. But we've stayed friends since then.
Very cool.
Nice one. Okay, well, I guess we'll probably move away from the doom and gloom of what's going on right now. Maybe go back a little bit. So, I guess before this all came to head, you had a pretty crazy, busy 12 months. Got married, right?
Yeah.
Last year.
Yes, indeed.
Oh yeah,
belated
congratulations for that.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it was a perfect day. So, I think what I've been doing last year. It's been a busy year. No Man's Land, less than a year ago, which was a lot of fun. I'm very proud of that record. And then been touring that. We did that kind of storytelling set. I don't know if either of you saw it, but it was kind of a seated affair that was a different approach to my old material.
Yeah, no, I didn't see it myself, but I knew that that's something that you were doing. Did that?
Yeah.
Go down well?
It did, and we recorded all of the shows as well, and so we are sifting through that material. And that's another thing that I'm not really supposed to be talking about, but I'll just do a podcast wink at this point, and you can make of that what you will.
Also, was it last year that Love Iron Song went gold?
I think it was the start of this year, actually, but yeah, it was. I mean, Love Iron Song went silver a few years ago, and I was blown away by that, and then just kind of assumed that would be that. Do you know what I mean? That's nice. That's a sales award. I'll put that in my downstairs loo and move on with my life. And it was an incredible thing to discover that it's still selling. So I'm very grateful for that. I mean, when I made that record, the idea of getting any kind of sales award would have been ridiculous. So I'm very proud of that.
That's cool. I also want to say on a personal level, it would be remiss of me to not mention, and I'm sure you've heard this so many times since that record came out, but in particular, the song obviously about your friend Queen is Dead, which is obviously one of your big songs. Like, you know, I lost a friend to cancer in his late 20s, and that song was just like meant so much to me and the other friends at the time. And like, I remember my friend Chris keeps saying to me, like, he goes, if I ever run into Frank Turner at a show or in a pub, I just want to take him aside and say, mate, just the tone of that song and the lyrics, it just...
Well, thank you.
You know. Yeah,
so it was one of those songs that just kind of thank you. It's one of those songs that just kind of arrived. I obviously I knew my friend wasn't well, and I'd been thinking about it, but I hadn't written anything. And then after she passed away, I was in Paris, funnily enough, dating a French girl who I wrote another song about on that album. But she used to work during the day, so I spent a good few months just kind of in Paris, and I walked up to Sacré-Cœur. On top of the hill there, and sat down and pretty much wrote the song in one draft. So, or at least the lyrics, let's say. So yeah, it felt like it was one that needed to come. Yeah.
No, it's beautiful. Yeah. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
You've been out to Sierra Leone this last year as well. Was it
I was there in January. Yeah, it was January this year, the start of my year.
So you do that work with Joe as part of the Joe Strummer Foundation, right?
Yeah, the Joe Strummer Foundation is run by a guy called Jamie Sticks, who used to be the barman at Nambucca when I lived there back in the mid 2000s, and we've all moved on to greater things. And he's now running the Joe Strummer Foundation. So in 2017 he sent me an email that just said, "Do you fancy going to Sierra Leone?" And I called him back and said, "What the fuck are you smoking? Like, what are you talking about?" And he told me about the charity that they've been working with for a while, and said that they wanted to send somebody out there. And I'd never been to West Africa before, so I immediately started reading Wikipedia furiously and said yes. And the first trip was kind of like culture shock, top to bottom. But I'm really pleased that was my third trip in January this year, and it really felt... on the first trip, it was really interesting. Hazel, the woman who runs the charity, who's English, said to me, but lives out there, she said to me, one thing you should know, she was like, don't tell people you're coming back if you're not actually coming back. She was like, people will believe the things that you say to them out here, and they will be crushed if you say that and it isn't true. And I immediately said, no problem, I'm fucking coming back. Like, I didn't really see the point in going once. Do you know what I mean? That would feel much more kind of dilettante and much more touristy to me. So building a rapport with people over there has been a wonderful thing. Actually, one of the thing I was doing this morning before we started this conversation, after my breakfast, but before I had a shower, was I'm working on some tracks. I'm working up some backing tracks for some of the guys over there. When I first went over there, they were all basically musically either doing kind of gangster rap or doing stuff like Akon. You know what I mean?
Really?
And the thing right up your alley.
Yeah, and I shot up with the acoustic guitar, and they had no fucking idea who I was at all. Incidentally, it's worth throwing in that I've earned a massive newfound respect for Akon since going to West Africa.
Really?
Collaboration coming up?
I doubt that. I'm not a fan of his music particularly, but that guy, you know, he's Nigerian, and he has ploughed tens of millions of his own money into development projects in West Africa. He has done incredible things for the people out there, and I think that's deserving of some respect. But yeah, so but since I've been going out there, quite, because we take guitars out there, and I've been teaching people guitar and stuff, and quite a few of the kids out there have started writing. I don't want to say songs that sound like me, but you know, kind of Bob Marley-ish type stuff, let's say. So one of the things that I've been doing when I'm not there is working up backing tracks, you know, laying down kind of a beat and a guitar part and a bass line, and then I send it over to them and they put vocals on them. So we've been working on a few things like that, which is fun.
Very cool. So I'm just like personally interested as well, because I think like you're just with almost the same age. I think you're a year older than me. So it's just like, so I know a bit about the music you grew up on, like, obviously, like things like Counting Crows, Iron Maiden, so it was quite varied. Like, just what were like some of the key like milestones for you personally, and like. Because, like, for me, like Billy Bragg was a big one for me. For example, I just wondered if that was similar for you. And, sorry.
We'll get to Billy Bragg in a minute, because there's an interesting story on that. Generally speaking, so my parents don't really listen to anything other than like classical music and show. Obviously, I'd heard rock music on like TV adverts and shit like that, but like it wasn't really. I didn't really know anybody who was into rock music. I had an older sister, and she was listening to. I remember she was into stuff like Four Non Blondes and Madonna and that kind of territory. And then there was this day, I've told the story a million times, but like I was at a friend's house playing Games Workshop, and his older brother had an Iron Maiden poster, and I thought it was cool as shit. Right. And then he said, well, that's a band. And I said, what the fuck are you talking about? There can't be a band that's that cool as to have like a zombie cowboy in the future. It was Stranger in a Strange Land poster. And then I my dad bought me an Iron Maiden cassette on his way home from work, and that was just a life-changing thing for me. So I was into Maiden for a while. Then I have a distant cousin. My family's enormous, and I know all of my distant cousins. It's quite weird. But I have a distant cousin who sort of twigged that I was into Maiden and was like, you know that there are other bands that sound like this as well? And I was like, no, it can't be true. So he gave me a tape with like AC/DC and Judas Priest on it. And then my best mate from school he'd got into Metallica and Pantera, so we started listening to that kind of thing. And I was a metalhead for a long time, started buying Kerrang! Magazine. Actually, funnily enough, not buying Kerrang! Magazine because my parents banned me from buying it. So at the age when my mates... This is a true story. At the age when my mates were shoplifting porn mags from the W.H. Smith in Winchester, I was shoplifting Kerrang! And Raw and Metal Hammer and stuff like that. And they go home and jack off, and I go home and learn about metal. So that was a formative experience, if ever there was one. And then the next thing was Nirvana. I was obsessed with Nirvana for a time. Kurt Cobain used the word punk quite a lot in referring to himself. And then Green Day and Offspring happened. Dookie and Smash came out around the same time when I was about 12, 13. So I got those. And then I think that, there's a lot of value in being a gateway punk band. Once or twice in my life, people have rather snidely dismissed me as being nothing more than a gateway act, and I'm just like, I'm absolutely fucking fine with that. What a wonderful thing to be. Because the fact of the matter is, no one anywhere has woken up in the morning and just gone and bought a leftover crack record with no prior. No. Do you know what I mean? It's like, you have to get there somehow. And, so for me, it was Green Day and Offspring, and so through them I got into NOFX, who we talked about already. And then, I don't know about you guys, I did this thing, because obviously this is pre the internet. And we used to cross-reference thanks lists in Epitaph.
I thought you were going to say
records.
that. Yeah.
And I mean, one thing I would do is essentially buy anything with the Epitaph or Fat Wreck logo on it. And there was a record store in Winchester, and the guy in there kind of got to know that I would do that, so he'd put them aside for me. And sometimes I came across some amazing stuff doing that, and sometimes I ended up buying kind of Down by Law records, which I'm not as into, I have to admit, even at the time. Or assorted jelly beans and stuff like that.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
But I essentially, you'd sit down with, you've got 3 records you like, and everybody thanked all the bands that they toured within them. So you'd look down, and if there was any band that you'd not heard of that was on all 3 thanks lists, you'd be like, sweet, I need to get that. And go down to the record store and ask them to order it. Or after a while, as I got kind of deeper into the underground, I started getting into distro catalogs. So Crank Records from Louisville, Kentucky had a mail order catalog. Initial Records from Delaware, I think. That might be wrong. And then in particular, No Idea Records in Gainesville. They all had mail order catalogs, so I started buying like, Hot Water Music, I Hate Myself, Boy Sets Fire, Mineral, Christie Front Drive, all that kind of thing. I was a teenage music nerd, and I was lucky enough to have a mate who was incredibly... not incredibly. He was better off than me. Let's say that he had a much bigger allowance from his parents, and he was into the same music as me. So what we'd do is the two of us would look at these distros together. He'd order 10 CDs, and then I would tape them off him, and that's how that worked for quite a long time. And that road took me down through hardcore into emo, post-hardcore, math rock, and then into stuff like grindcore and all that sort of thing. And then the next thing was discovering that there were people in England making this kind of music. I discovered Household Name Records in the UKHC scene in London in the 90s, and I went down to Evil Fest, and I went to see Knuckle Dust and Imbalance and Special Move and Nine Bar and Stamping Ground, all these kind of bands, and got super absorbed in that scene because it was actually happening. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't now just looking at photos of cool gigs in Gainesville. It was like, I can go to a hardcore show in London at a bar with no stage in it, and I can X up because I was straight edge at the time and all the rest, and throw myself into all of that. So that was the big thing for me. And then, sorry, I'm doing the whirlwind version of all of this, if you'll forgive me.
That's very welcome. Yeah.
And then, so there was the point in my life, and then I was in a band. I was in a band called Million Dead, and Million Dead was sort of Knee Jerk was an attempt to kind of smash Refused and Early Cave In together, not very successfully because we were 17. And then, Million Dead, we were more into stuff like Hot Snakes and Jesus Lizard. Still quite a lot of Refused as well, if I'm honest. But and then it was just, essentially at some point in my early 20s, I started to get a little bit tired of shouty, chuggy guitar music, and started listening to kind of country and folk and roots is the word people use, stuff with acoustic guitars. It was funny because of the way my music taste had worked out. I'd never really listened to Bob Dylan or Bruce Springsteen or Neil Young or any of those kind of people before I'd listened to every single available Sick of It All B-side. You know what I mean? So so it was kind of new territory for me, discovering Johnny Cash and Merle Haggard and all that kind of thing. So and then that started harking back to the fact that my sister had also, when we were kids, got into stuff like Counting Crows and Levelers, which I sort of had one foot in that taste, and like the first couple of Radiohead records and that sort of thing. So I kind of rediscovered a taste for sort of songs and melody, let's say, and started playing acoustic guitar in my spare time. And then Million Dead broke up, and I thought I'd do that full time, and that's where that brings us to. Billy Bragg, incidentally. So this is a true story, and it's going to sound like I'm protesting too much, but I promise it's true. After I'd done my first kind of demo CDs that I was selling at shows, and I'd done maybe 6 months of solo touring, so this is 2005, 2006, all the fucking time people would tell me I sounded like Billy Bragg. Which, and the thing is, now I can sit here and take that as a compliment, because I think Bill is a legendary songwriter and a genius and all the rest of it, and a friend, I might add.
I was just saying, when I first heard Nashville, Tennessee, I was just like, because I knew Million Dead, but I didn't know you were doing the solo stuff, and I heard that Nashville, Tennessee, I was like, this sounds so much like Billy Bragg, but that was a good thing when I thought that,
Well, that's it. I'm not sure that people weren't saying it to me as an insult. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. People weren't saying that to me as an insult, but I got a bit sort of shirty about it because I was like, who's this fucking Billy Bragg character? I went out and I got that Must I Paint You a Picture box set that came out around
so
that time.
So many good songs on that. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's a pretty comprehensive greatest hits, if you like, and I went, oh, okay, and got hard into it from there. And it was not that long after that I encountered Bill firsthand, simply because there are many things to say in Bill's credit, but one of them is the fact that he is an absolute dedicatee of underground music. He knows more about what's happening on the front line of new and emerging acts and underground acts than I ever will. And he's, given his age, I think that's really impressive, because people do get less interested in new stuff when they get older. And he's always got his finger on that pulse, which I think is really impressive. And he came across me, and I ended up playing on the left field not long after that. And he really helped me along. So hats off to Bill.
I guess just on that, for obviously where you are now, you very much transition across scenes in terms of the festivals, the gigs you play. You go to the punk rock ones, you do your folky ones, you go to the mainstream festivals as well. Do you approach them any differently, or is it do you go in with a different mindset for like a mainstream festival, or what you play or what you do? Like
I'm in two minds about that, because I sort of feel like I should just do what I fucking do. Do you know what I mean? You book me, you get me. That said, I probably do less crowd surfing at a seated folk festival than I would at a punk show. And I guess I do tailor it a little bit, I suppose. But there is a level on which, we played at Folk by the Oak last summer in Hatfield, which is a very trad folky festival, and we headlined. And there was a bunch of people who were there to see me who knew the deal. There were a lot of people who were very politely and pleasantly checking out what I do. And I've been throughout the whole set. I've been in two minds as to whether or not I was going to get in the crowd. And at the end of the show, I was like, "Fuck it, man, I'm doing it." Do you know what I mean? These guys need to see what a show looks like. So and I could also sort of tell that there were enough people down the front who knew the deal, that I wouldn't just get on the crowd and fall straight on my ass. So I decided that it was worth doing and got involved.
And
it was fun.
Success?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I didn't get dropped, so so there's victory for you.
So I know we kind of railroaded through the whole progression for you from a music point of view, but just wanted to go back to kind of your actual journey into music, obviously. It's well documented. You went to Eton. You're privately schooled. How was that in terms of kind of taking your music from just your hanging out with your friends, going to gigs, doing a little bit of music, to that actually becoming coming on to the next level and a real career? Was that smooth sailing, or was it difficult? I know you sing about it.
I mean, the first thing to say is that I didn't. You said friends there. I didn't really have many friends at school because I fucking hated it.
Oh wow!
People that I went to school with, and I felt very. I mean, I don't want to be too kind of woe is me about all of this, but like I got sent there on a scholarship, and I have a vivid memory of not really being entirely sure what was going on when I got dropped off for the boarding part of it for the first time. Yeah. Like my mum and dad dropped me off and then left, and I was like, wait, what? Where are you guys going? Why am I still here? I really didn't enjoy it. And then counterfactual history is boring, but like I wonder how visceral punk rock would have been for me if I hadn't been caught in what I've found to be an extremely unpleasant situation, because the rage and the defiance of it, and the fact that fucking no one else, with the exception of that guy I was chatting about earlier, nobody else at my school knew what punk was. A few people knew who Green Day and Offspring were. No one had ever fucking heard NOFX, let alone Black Flag. And I remember it would have been summer 95, towards the end of 95, which is around the time I first went there was the Blur Oasis face-off in the charts. And I fucking hated Britpop at the time. I must admit, I've gone back and discovered some good bands that I missed, like Pulp and Gomez and bands like that. But I really hated it at the time. So I had a homemade T-shirt that said "shit pop," and I wore it. I wore it in school and got the shit kicked out of me. I was a new kid. First year, I was a scholarship kid who were always slightly on the edge socially there anyway. And I marched into the middle of school wearing a shirt that said "shit pop," and so they kicked the fuck out of me. I'm medium proud of that. For me, punk rock was always an escape and a release. And like, one of the things I find kind of interesting, difficult, I've got to be careful in how I phrase this, but like I have friends who like talk about how, my parents took me to see The Clash when I was a kid, or, I went to Glastonbury when I was like 8, or at the very least, I went through my parents' record collection and listened to Led Zeppelin, all this kind of thing. And that's all well and good. But for me, my understanding and my relationship with music is, in its very core, is kind of rebellious, in the sense that this was a thing I was not supposed to do, and it was music I had to go and find on my own, and that I was told not to listen to. And then when I was at school, people took the piss out of me for listening to this kind of music, and then I started going to hardcore shows. And indeed, I might add, there was a moment when I first started going to hardcore shows in London in the late 90s, where people on the scene discovered that me and my mate came from Eton College, and there was a bit of a backlash against that. People were just like, "What the fuck are you guys doing here?" Yeah. Which was initially utterly mortifying, because I was like, I'm fucking here because I hate where I'm from. Do you know what I mean? And like, this is my escape, and don't fucking close this down as well. But to their credit, a lot of people on the scene turned around and said, look, punk's supposed to be for everybody, particularly Lil from Household Name, who remains a close friend. And they sort of said, nice. Look, they're as welcome as anybody. But all the way through, like, music feels like a thing I've had to, like, I don't want to be melodramatic, but it feels like a thing that I've slightly had to fight for to be into. Do you know what I mean? And it's a sense of identity that I've had to like carve out, and that's quite important to me. And like I say, people are like, oh, I went to Glastonbury when I was 10. I'm like, well, lucky fucking you, dickhead. Do you know what I mean? I didn't. And there's no universe in which that could have happened. I asked my parents if I could go to Reading one year when I was a kid, and they told me to get fucked. It's always been my escape.
So at what point did kind of family start to kind of accept that was going to be your journey?
A couple of years ago. I mean, I'm barely exaggerating when I say that. I mean, there was definitely a moment when Millie and Deb broke up. My mum, I mean, my parents separated at around that time, and my dad and I are completely estranged these days. But and that's a long story that I'm not going to go into because it's personal. But my mum, I think my mum kind of saw Millie and Deb broke up and kind of breathed a sigh of relief because it was around the time that I graduated from uni as well, and she sort of said to herself, "Right, cool, that phase, that dreaded word, phase, is finished now, and he's going to go and get a job or whatever." And I got an acoustic guitar and started playing solo shows, and indeed playing much smaller shows for much less money, and sleeping on the floor, and indeed kind of getting fucked up a lot of the time. That was a very messy period of my life, and I think my mum was mortified by that, and like, you know, really worried and upset. And I can, now that I'm a bit older, I can sort of understand why. If nothing else, what I do is completely outside of her universe. Do you know what I mean? She doesn't get it.
Right.
But I think if I had to pick a moment where that changed, it would probably be the Olympics thing that we did, because at that moment, it was like, this is a real job. And my mum kind of got it at that
scale.
point. Yeah, I mean, the thing. So I'm going off on red herrings here, but the thing about the Olympics that was funny was that Danny Boyle asked us to do it, and I was like, fuck it, why not? But we had to sign non-disclosure agreements. We weren't allowed to tell anyone that we were doing it, right? And I decided I was going to tell my mum, because she's my fucking mum, do you know what I mean? And it was exciting.
Yeah.
And I told her, and I was like, you cannot tell anybody about this. So my mum went and told fucking everybody about this. And like, I started getting like text messages from my aunts and stuff being like, "Oh, I'm so proud of you." And it was just like, what the fuck? So that was a bit, there was a near miss in the sense that like, if we had broken that disclosure agreement, we could have been kicked off the show.
Oh wow!
Right. Any idea how that came about though? In terms of Danny Boyle being kind of a
fan.
A Frank Turner
He's
fan?
a fan.
Or?
Yeah, he got in touch, and I got an email
Nice.
saying Danny Boyle wants to have a meeting with you. And me and my manager got invited in for this meeting, and we knew he was doing the Olympics at the time. It was in the press, and we both immediately said, "Well, it's not the Olympics because that would be fucking ridiculous. So it's got to be something else." So we went in for this meeting with him, and he had a kind of animated mock-up of the opening ceremony on which there was a little animated guy with like a picture of my face pasted on it on his thing already, and interestingly, I did 3 songs there. One of them was broadcast as the main ceremony, but he chose some deep cuts. He asked me to play Sailor's Boots, which is a B-side. Do you know what I mean? And I was just like, this is a dude who knows his shit, you know? And indeed, he said to me, "Look, you can play whatever you want, but this is my suggestion." And I was like, I'm going to go with your suggestions, Danny, because you're running the fucking opening Olympic ceremony.
And you're Danny Boyle.
And you're Danny Boyle. He's a lovely guy. And yeah, so we did it. And I mean, I've not had any contact with him since, but he was an absolute sweetheart to work with.
Have you had any other fans that have come out the woodwork that have kind of taken you by surprise? Yeah.
Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant used to come to my shows a lot. I've no idea.
Right.
I mean, not with me knowing about it. I would sort of discover afterwards because they would get guest list off the promoter or something, or some connect somewhere in the machine that I didn't know about. And Daniel Radcliffe has cited Love Iron Song as one of his favourite records.
Right.
So
Nice.
Hooray!
Cool.
I mean, he seems like a lovely guy. I've never met the guy. I'm sure he's a sweetheart. But you know,
He comes across well, yeah.
Yeah, you know, and he's kind of the right age. Do you know what I mean? There's definitely, and I'm including you guys in this as well, if you don't mind. But like, there's definitely a demographic of people who were kind of, finishing uni around the time Love Iron Song came out, and that was definitely or at uni, and that was a big thing, I think.
But it's funny, like you do, because of obviously those influences that came in when you started going solo. I think, and I'm sure you see this a lot as well. You do appeal to some individuals in like older demographics. Like I've just remembered, like check out this random story. So I remember this is maybe about 5 years ago or whatever. I used to walk to work. I was working at King's College at the time, and I was like walking through London, and this woman, she must have been in her, I'd say late 50s, early 60s, just stopped me in the street, and she was just, because I was wearing a Social Distortion t-shirt, she was like, "Oh, right. Social Distortion," and I was just like, "Oh, are you oh, cool, are you a fan?" And she was like, "No, but I am obsessed with Frank Turner, and I've heard him cite them as an influence, so I've checked out Social Distortion, now I'm a fan of them."
Oh, amazing. Mike Ness owes me one on that. Fuck it up.
Yeah, he definitely does.
That's That's right. In fairness, I owe him many more in return because we toured with those guys endlessly, and he's a sweetheart.
Is he?
Well, at the other end of the spectrum, I got connected with Social Distortion because his son, who I think was about 10 or 11 at the time, got into my stuff, and he tells a story that he had constantly walked past his son's bedroom listening to music coming out of it that he hated, and then one day heard a record that he didn't hate, and he sort of popped his head around the door and said, "What's that?" And he said, "Oh, it's Frank Turner," and then he invited me on tour.
That's very, very cool.
Oh, he's Mike Ness. I mean, that is sort of the end of the conversation, really. Do you know what I mean?
Sorry, just to jump back real quick. I just when you're talking about Eton, I just real quick want to ask because I work at LSE now, so I just wondered what your time there was like. You don't have to go into too much detail, but like, how was it being a student there?
It's to be honest, it's a funny thing. My mum and dad used to say to me when I was younger, you make your real friends for life at university, and I'm not in contact with anyone I went to university with because I was barely there.
Same actually.
Right. Yeah, not basically because I turned down a place. I've not really talked about this in public before, but fuck it, here we are. I turned down an unconditional offer from Cambridge University. Okay. They really wanted me to go, and I was so fucking sick of being at Eton College by that point in my life that the idea of going to Oxbridge at that point in time filled me with horror and revulsion. And I had also started getting really involved in the London hardcore scene, and I wanted to be in London. My dad's family's from London, as I mentioned at the start, but I grew up down in Winchester, and when I left school, I moved to London 45 minutes after my last A-level. I went home, grabbed a bag of clothes, and went to London, which pissed my mum off no end. And I lived in London for a while. I had done a little bit of squat in London during school holidays as well, whilst desperately trying to not tell people where I went to school. So, London was where I wanted to be, where I wanted to go. London's in my blood. It still is. Do you know what I mean? I doubt that's ever going to change. But I came up to London, threw myself into the scene, and then I got a place at LSE, and I went to LSE. But essentially, I showed up for the lessons and lectures, and I did the work, and I did care about the academic side of it. But I basically didn't ever really socialise because I already had a social circle in London and places to be. I put on a couple of shows in the basement at LSE.
Okay.
Yeah, Million Dead played there twice, I think, and I promoted those shows. That was just, it was like, we were at that point in a band's career where you're like, play anywhere, at any time, and that was an opportunity to put on a gig, so I did that. The stuff I was learning at LSE definitely went into my lyrics of Million Dead in the sense that I was studying Central and Eastern European history, and then I ended up writing songs about Polish communism and other such cool and hip things, but yeah, it's slightly passing by. They tried to kick me out in my final year because I wasn't there because I was on tour, and I missed a shitload of classes, and I got a call saying you're getting kicked out, and that kind of put the fear of God in me because my parents would have killed me. So so I did graduate, but yeah, I didn't go to a graduation ceremony or anything like that. The one other thing, I don't know what capacity you work at LSE in, but there's a lecturer there called Anita Prasmauska, Dr. Prasmauska, who lectures in Eastern European history.
Okay,
and she was my tutor, and she's still there now. And a story worth telling though is that when I got my degree, she asked me to go and study for a master's with her. Studying history, and I said I'm not going to do that because Million Dead was really kicking off at that point. So I said no, she said you should stop doing your stupid music thing that you're doing, or whatever, however she phrased it. So I went off and did that anyway, and then 10 years later, we were headlining the O2 in London, or I was headlining the O2 in London.
Yeah.
And a couple of nights beforehand, I was having a conversation with my sister and remembering Dr. Prasmauska's existence. And, email addresses at universities are pretty easy. You just stick their first name and last name and the LSE thing at the end. So I dropped her a line and just said, listen, I haven't spoken to you in a decade, but I just wanted to know that my stupid music thing's gone quite well. And I'm playing the O2 tonight, and if you want to, or tomorrow night, or whatever it was, and if you want to come, I'll put you on the guest list. I'll get you a box and all the rest of it. And she wrote back and said, "I'm still not interested in your stupid music thing." Having said that, she did write a book about Władysław Gomułka, who I wrote a song about, and I went down to the launch and we had coffee, and it was very nice to see her.
Oh, nice.
She's a sweetheart, and she's an incredibly smart person. And in life, that is what I would have done, because, I mean, as I say, I got a scholarship when I was 12 years old, and I'm not trying to brag at this point, but, academia suits my brain, let's say that. Right. And that is probably the other thing I would have done. I don't mean to say that in a way that, and it would have been easy, but that was always plan B.
Just on the Million Dead thing, Frank, I was speaking to St. Chris the other day. I saw you years ago, Million Dead, in Newcastle as a support band, and I can't for the love of me remember who it was. Can you help us out?
I can give you some...
Nick's memory's terrible.
It might...
Did you tour with 100 Reasons?
No, we played with 100 Reasons a bunch. And I know those guys, but we didn't tour with them around the UK. We did a bunch of London shows with them, kind of before they blew up, actually. And very proud of them, we all were too, I might add. It was a funny old thing. Suddenly this band from our scene, because they were kind of from the hardcore scene originally, right. And then suddenly they sold 100,000 records and everyone went, fuck. No, we toured with Funeral for a Friend a lot. It might well have been them. Or it might have been Pitch Shifter would be the other option.
Oh, that's weird. I couldn't imagine you going to see either of those bands, Nick, so...
No.
This remains a mystery. No disrespect to those bands, but I don't think Nick likes them.
Yeah. Any American bands?
We toured with Finch.
That'll be
it. That's definitely it.
This makes sense.
Yeah. Funny enough, the Finch tour, the funny thing about the Finch tour is the Finch tour happened over the London bombing in 2005, I think it was. Yeah, 2005,
right,
early 2005. Yeah. We were on tour with Finch, and my dad used to work in London, and he had gone off to work that morning and then turned his phone off and decided to sack work off and go golfing with his mates. Yeah. And my mum, the news came through about the bomb, and it was sort of around the time and area that my dad would have been, and so we all shit ourselves and couldn't get hold of him because his phone's off, and we were all just like, fuck. And then it transpired that he was just getting drunk with his mate. He turned his phone on again, and he wasn't watching the news either, so he turned his phone on about 3 p.m. and had like 9 million missed calls or whatever, and it was like, what's going on? And it was like, you dickhead. But he was all right, thankfully. But yeah, that was the Finch tour. I remember that well. That was a good tour.
I think we'll ask you a couple of quick questions, and then we'll wrap this thing up.
We usually do like a quick fire thing at the end of our podcasts.
I will attempt to be quick. I talk quite a lot, you might have noticed, so I'll attempt to restrain myself.
Quick fire-ish.
Yeah, no, we always welcome guests that talk quite a lot, because the opposite can be a bit more challenging, shall we say?
Actually, I can imagine.
Before we go into this, Frank, I just something I just randomly wanted to ask you before, and like, if this isn't a negative, this will mean nothing. But I'm just curious, like, coming from Winchester and the Winchester scene, did you ever know? I'm friends with a band called, they were originally called Lassie Come Home, and they changed their name to Not Katie's and had some minor success in the early 2000s. Do you remember them? I don't know. Coming from the same part of the world.
I'm vaguely aware of their existence, but I mean, the thing for me is that like my time of going to shows and hanging out in Winchester was a bit earlier, at a point in time when the alternative scene in Winchester pretty much consisted of one goth band, and whose name now escapes me. That's weird. I've forgotten that. But and we go to the railway all the fucking time. But there wasn't really anything. There wasn't a punk scene in Winchester. Let's put it that way. There was probably indie stuff going on, but given my feelings about Britpop, I wasn't really,
of course,
interested in that.
So this would have been just before
there were metal shows, right? Yeah, and then I discovered that if I wanted punk rock, I had to go to London. So I then started going to London.
Cool. Yep. Thanks. I was just curious on that one. Nick, do you want to
get a quick fire question, Chris?
No, it wasn't. Let's get into the quick fire things, and then we'll wrap this up.
So the first question is, if you could go back to one Frank Turner show from history, which one would it be?
That's a good question. Probably, this is going to be boring, but probably the Wembley show, simply because I don't really remember the Wembley show, because I was so fucking like nervous and uptight about that gig that it went by in an absolute blur. And I don't really remember what it was like, and I'd quite like to know. And the thing is, I learned from that experience to take a bit more time on stage and smell the roses and that kind of thing. So I remember there have been plenty of other big or bigger shows since then, but that one was such an event, and I don't really remember it.
who's been the artist that you've been most starstruck by, like either playing with or even just meeting, being in this world? Cliche question, but we've got to ask.
Yeah, no, I know, but I've got I'll try and keep this brief. But like, I've met a lot of people who I grew up listening to their music and enjoying it, and I've comported myself well for the most part. But when I met James Hetfield, I fucked it up. Like, absolutely. Inarguably fucked it up. It was backstage at a Social D show in Oakland, California, which is where he lives, and he's friends with Mike Ness. And he came down, and he was at the after show, and I went over and I went, hi, and basically then completely clammed up, and it was so awkward that he started making small talk. Like, he was like, I like your tattoos, and I said thanks, and eventually my fucking tour manager came over and like led me away like a fucking idiot child, and sort of apologising over my shoulder, and he was like, "That was the worst thing I've ever seen in my life," and I said, "I know." So yeah, James Hetfield.
Yeah, I mean, that's understandable. Probably one of the biggest bands of all time.
And also, you know, whatever one might think about what Metallica have done in recent years, and I think that there are many different things to say about that, they're still fucking Metallica, and I think that people who want to be too cool to be into Metallica can go fuck themselves, personally.
So on the other side of that question, is there anyone who didn't kind of live up to your expectation, or like maybe disappointed you when meeting them?
Yes, but I'm loath to name names because I was raised to not say anything if nothing nice to say. But there's been one or two that I've encountered in my time that has been less fun. But I'm not going to slag it off.
I mean, given the fact that obviously you have this principle to try and not speak badly about people, it kind of demonstrates how bad Nicki Minaj must have been that time.
Oh, yeah, well, I've got no issue with that because she is an obvious. And I had no idea who she was, and she was just being an absolute scumbag and to the crew backstage, and that really grinds my gears. So, that is one that I'm happy to recount.
Good for you. It's my turn, isn't it? Sorry. What's the artist that surprised you the most?
You know, actually, going back to the things that we've talked about already today, I think I'd have to say Blur, funnily enough. I really, really didn't like Blur growing up, and I'm still not the biggest fan, but I caught them live at Glastonbury, whenever that was, and was really pretty profoundly blown away by how good they were live. And they absolutely kicked the shit out of the audience. The show was super energetic, kind of punk, and I walked away from the stage re-evaluating my opinion of them. My tour manager is the biggest Blur fan in the fucking universe and had always been telling me this, and I've been slightly ignoring her. So I learned that day.
Okay, a couple more. So we got favourite festival and favourite venue to play.
Favourite festival, it's a tie for me between 2000 Trees and Beautiful Day. Beautiful Days, sorry. The Levelers Festival. I mean, but kind of for the same reasons. It's just a really, really lovely family kind of atmosphere there. Everybody's on the same team. You know, they're festivals where I just feel very cool wandering around, hanging out, you know. So it was the second one's favourite band, was it?
Venue.
Oh, venue. Sorry, venue. Yeah, favourite venue. I mean, there's a part of me that thinks that, with all due respect to the indie venues that I'm trying to help at the moment, that a show is about much more than the room that you're in. It's about the energy exchange between an audience and a performer, and blah 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 blah. I have a lot of love for the Joiners, and I have a lot of love for Nambucca, which is one of those the first two. I probably have to pick City as my number one in Nottingham because it's just the best venue in the world. In fact, as I speak to you now, on the wall in front of me, I have a framed piece of floor I've got a piece of Roxy's old floor framed, which they gave me, which I'm very proud of.
Nice. Just linking on from what you just said there is, I mean, if you had to pick a country of craziest fans, you said that, you know, the people that make it. Who would you put that down? You haven't done South America yet though, right? And they're apparently cited as some of the craziest fans in the world.
Well, I was going to say Mexican people tend to be full on and like lovely way, but like man, they want to let you know that they're fans like a lot, and they'll find out the hotel you're staying in, and they'll come and hang out outside and all the rest of it. But I mean, that's not to do anybody in Mexico down. I love playing in Mexico; it's awesome. Nice. But I mean, I have to say though, this is going to sound like a slightly milk toast answer, but these days I tend to spend much more time outside the UK touring because there is more of the world than there is of the UK. We live in a small country, but nevertheless it's my home country and it's where I do the best. So every time I come back and do a UK tour, I'm always kind of pleasantly surprised again about how fucking great the shows are. Do you know what I mean? It's just like the atmosphere is always amazing, the crowds are always killer, and it's always just kind of a nice sort of homecoming.
Oh,
Nice.
lovely. And finally, I guess we're asking this because for the most part, guests on our show tend to be from pop punk bands, past and present. So,
Sure.
So it's a double question. If you had like a favourite all-time pop punk band and a favourite current pop punk band, if you pay attention to what's happening in that world much these days.
I don't pay as much attention to it as I should, but a little bit. All time, I mean, it's a tie for me between Descendants and NoFX.
Okay.
If both of those count as pop punk, who knows? But like, I mean, Everything Sucks is arguably my favourite punk album of all time. In terms of current bands, I'm a really I don't know if you want to call them pop punk, but I'm an enormous fan of Off With Their Heads. I mean, they happen to be friends and touring partners as well.
Nice. Yeah, we were going to chat to them at Manchester Punk Festival later this month, but for obvious reasons that's not happening.
Yeah.
It's a shame.
Yeah. Well, Ryan's a maniac, but he's an absolute sweetheart. And if you do talk to him, tell him I say go fuck yourself.
Will do.
On that note,
Yeah, Frank, thank you so much for giving us
Thank you guys.
your time.
This has been fun. I've been rambling away and telling old stories.
No,
but it's been fun.
It's been perfect. It's been perfect.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Ace.
Much appreciated.
Cool. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Frank.
Thanks very much, guys.
All
Take
right.
care.
Thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, we'd love it if you could subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's iTunes or Spotify or Stitcher or anywhere like that. Also, check us out on social media. If you just search for Wasting Time Podcast on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, give us a like or a follow on any of those. And also, we love hearing from listeners as well. So feel free anytime to drop us an email at thewastingtimepodcast@gmail.com, or obviously you can message us on social media as well. But yeah, we'll catch you next time.
For you to arrive.